finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, the factor that is, well, I think the most important factor that will shift the supply curve is a change in technology. Technology is the not just what we think of when we think of high tech and fancy equipment. Technology in economics is is the taking of any inputs and using them to produce that final good or service. And so the way that those inputs are combined into the final product is the technology. And technology, traditionally or historically, or just the reality of how things progress, technology improves. And companies are able to produce more and more goods and services at lower and lower cost over time. And some of that technology is what we would think of in terms of high technology, new inventions, new procedures, anything that's going to make it easier or less costly to produce goods and services is going to shift the supply curve to the right. And we generally would say that technology is only going to move our supply curve in one direction. Any of these other factors might move the supply curve one way or the other, but we would hope that technology is only going to be moving in one direction, that we're going to see our economy being more and more productive every year. Or at least not go backwards, that the technology we had in the past, we always have access to, and it's new technologies that are being developed and invented or discovered all the time are what's going to move the supply curve to the right. And that's really one definition of what economic growth is the the advance of technology. So now we're ready to put the supply and demand curves together on the same chart. So again, we're going to put quantity on the x-axis and the price on the y-axis. And of course, as we know, our supply curve is going to slope up. Our demand curve is going to slope down. And where they meet, we're going to find the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price. Now, very important, don't just say that, oh, where's the equilibrium price, and just put the little dot right there where they meet. The equilibrium price is over on the y-axis. So you just draw a straight line over from the, and we can find the equilibrium price. And similarly, we just go straight down from that point where they cross to find the equilibrium quantity. And the market is going to find this equilibrium point, or the equilibrium quantity, the equilibrium price by itself. The equilibrium price is also called the market clearing price, because we think about what would happen if the price were higher than the equilibrium price, we would actually end up with a surplus. If there were a price that was higher than equilibrium, this many suppliers would be out there in the market trying to sell at that particular price, but only this many buyers would be interested, or buyers for this much of the good would be interested, and so we would end up with a surplus. And the surplus in a market economy would be, so it would have a little better handwriting. Let me fix that in a second. Surplus. The surplus in the market economy will sort of correct itself, because you have all these sellers there trying to get rid of that item, trying to sell that item, and that would have the effect of pushing the price down. And as the price falls, more and more sellers are sort of leaving the market, while more and more buyers are coming in, or the buyers that are there are willing to buy more of the item as the price falls. And eventually you get to this point where all the sellers have been able to sell their item for the price, and there are no buyers out there that are unsatisfied at the price that's given. And so that would be the equilibrium price. And if the price were below that, we would end up with a shortage, because if the price were down here, say, you'd have this many people trying to buy this much of the good, and only this many sellers would be interested, or sellers for this particular quantity of the good would be interested. So we would end up with a shortage, where you would have all these buyers out there trying to buy the item, and many fewer sellers, or sellers of smaller quantities of that good out willing to sell. And so this would have the effect of bidding the price up. And as the price was bid up, the more and more sellers would come into the market, or the sellers that are there would be willing to put more and more of the item out there. They would be increasing their quantity supplied, while as the price goes up, some of our buyers would drop out, or they'd be interested in buying less of the item. And again, it would be self-correcting. Eventually, we would get to this equilibrium point where supply equals demand at the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price. So now we can talk about how some of the things that we discussed earlier that would shift a curve, how they might affect the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price. So let's just think for a minute about the market for donuts. And I kind of spelled donuts the way Dunkin' Donuts would sell donuts. And so let's think about the market for donuts. And so we have a supply of donuts and a demand for donuts. And so we're going to end up with an equilibrium quantity and an equilibrium price. And now let's say that the price of bagels falls. And let's think about bagels being a substitute for donuts, that people get up in the morning, they can either have a donut or they can have a bagel. And if the price of the price of bagels falls, well, more people are going to want to buy bagels. We're moving down the demand curve to a higher quantity of bagels. But it also means that fewer people are going to want to buy donuts at any particular price, that the bagels and donuts are a substitute. And so if the price of bagels falls, the demand for the demand for donuts is going to fall. So we have an increase in the quantity demanded for bagels as the bagel prices fell, but this shifts the demand curve for donuts. And so for any particular price, the number of donuts that's going to be demanded, the quantity of donuts demanded is going to fall. And so we're going to end up at a new equilibrium, a smaller equilibrium quantity for donuts, and a lower equilibrium price. So I guess I should call this quantity equilibrium prime, and I'll call this price equilibrium prime. A lower price and a lower quantity when the price of a substitute falls. That's the result. Now let's think about what would happen if the income of all of the consumers in our economy were to rise. And let's say that donuts is a normal good. So a normal good is one where the quantity demanded is going to, or the demand is going to increase if income goes up. And so we had our quantity, our equilibrium quantity, we had our equilibrium price, and then the income of the people in this market goes up. So maybe a new employer opens up in the area, or the government has offered some big extra tax payment for all the people that live in this particular area, or whatever. There's something that's happened that's increased the income of the people in the donut eating economy, and that donuts is a normal good. Well, if that happens, then the demand curve is going to shift to the right, and we're going to see an increase. We're going to get to a new equilibrium quantity, and that's going to be higher, so that we're going to see an increase in the quantity, and we're also going to see an increase in the price when the income increases and it is a normal good. But what if donuts had been an inferior good? Well, if donuts had been an inferior good, then the increase in income in our area would have led to a decrease in the demand for donuts. And so we would have seen the demand curve shift to the left, and we would again have gotten to a new equilibrium quantity and a new equilibrium price, but it would have been lower than before the change in income. So in this, if donuts were an inferior good and income were to rise, then the price and the quantity would both fall as the demand curve shifted to the left, because of the fact that the rise in income means that they're going to be consuming fewer donuts because of the fact that donuts is an inferior good, if that were to be the case. Okay, and then finally, one last scenario on this donut market. Again, we're going to have a quantity and a price, and it'll have a supply curve and a demand curve, which will help us find the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price. And let's say that the fast food restaurants in our market have decided to raise the price of the breakfast sandwiches, and that people, when they get up in the morning, have a choice. They can either go get a breakfast sandwich at a fast food place, or they can go get a donut. If the price of the breakfast sandwich has gone up, we're going to be moving up the demand curve of breakfast sandwiches to a lower quantity. Fewer people are going to want to buy the breakfast sandwich at the higher price, and they're going to want a donut instead. And so this is going to have the effect of shifting the demand curve for donuts to the right because of the rise in the price of breakfast sandwiches. So again, this would be a substitute increasing its price, leading to a shift to the right of the demand curve, which is going to lead to a higher quantity and a higher price of the donut because of the rise in the price of the breakfast sandwiches when donuts and breakfast sandwiches are substitutes. And I said that was the final, but I guess we'll have one more final, which is to think about what would happen if there was a change in the price of a complement. And so let's say that donuts and coffee are complements. So again, we're in the market for donuts, and we have our equilibrium quantity and our equilibrium price. And let's say the price of coffee increases. Well, if the price of coffee increases and people are generally buying their coffee and their donuts at the same time, well, if we increase the price of coffee, we know we're going to have a smaller quantity of coffee demanded because we're moving up the demand curve to smaller quantity of coffee. And it's also going to mean that we're going to see a shift in of the demand curve for donuts, because if people are only going to buy donuts if they are also buying their coffee, they're going to buy less coffee because the price of coffee has gone up. The demand for donuts is also going to shift in, and so we're going to end up at a lower price and a lower quantity of donuts because of the change in the price of the complement. So the price of the complement went up, the quantity demanded, or the quantity of the donut went down. And the price of the donut went down because we had a shift in demand curve. So the demand shifts in when you have a increase in the price of a complement.